Now, we've all seen snow, and some love it, and some don't. But sometimes these storms can be really bad. And this is a story of how they survived back in the old days, our elders, our great-grandfathers, in these mountains across this country. And they seen some hard times. And they would be snowed in where they lived in these mountains and rural areas across America for months and months at a time till spring broke. And just how did they survive, and what did they do? One such example is the Donner Party in 1846. And they started out late, crossing the Sierras into California. In 1846 was 87 people, and only half survived. They started out too late. They know they couldn't make it across, so they held up building shelter. And they had some hard times. Even talk of cannibalism. They run out of food, and this is a sad, true story across this country. And many of times I've heard stories of people trying to get out in this snow across America, to only be found, if found at all, froze to death. So let's look at what they done. There's nothing better to sit by an old warm fire and a cold outside. But I'm going to take you back to how our people used to live in these mountains across this country in rural areas. No electricity, no indoor plumbing, no phones, no cell phones, no computers. And they had a hard time, but they survived. And it was a lot simpler time. These old mountains, whether it be the Appalachias or the Rocky Mountains, they're so beautiful in the summer, in the warm time. But in the winter, they're still just as beautiful. But they are treacherous and so cold. Now these people in these mountains, they lived in little simple dwellings like this, log cabins, mostly made out of American chestnut oak, all throughout these mountains. Nice home. Middle of these mountains, these old hollers. But when it turned wintertime, it turned cold in these mountains. Wind blowing. But they worked so hard all summer long preparing for this. If they didn't, they would not survive. That's the way it was back in these times. And these storms would come in and just isolate them. It was already isolated in these mountains. But they knowed how to survive. They'd done it generations before. And they prepared for this all in the warm summer months. They didn't have a want for nothing if they used their head. They canned everything they growed, and they stored it just for these hard times in the wintertime. This is the way they was. And their meat, they raised their own meat mostly, slaughtered it, and smoked it, and prepared it for the long winter months. And yes, they worked on getting a lot of wood up, because it took a lot of wood to keep them old cabins and houses warm. And they done it all by hand. No chainsaw, just sawing it, splitting it, cutting it, by hand. And these old winter months would come in here, and they was ready for it. If they didn't, they wouldn't survive, that's for sure. And these old farms, they still had to work them, even though how deep the snow got or how cold it got. Some of these old places, their neighbors were miles away, so they was on their own. And they were some cold times in these mountains, month after month. And these old big snows would come in. Sometimes it'd snow for days. And they would be huddled up in these cabins, these old homes, next to an old fire. But they prepared for this. And the old places they used to have, like old fireplaces like this in these cabins, they looked like this. In the early days, they cooked the same place in the fireplace that they kept warm. But it was hard to keep these old cabins warm. They were drafty. But this is the old fireplaces of the day, what they look like. Then in the early days, Ben Franklin invented a stove, and it used coal and wood. This is one of the earlier models. And as time went on, they come out with earlier, different models of all kinds. This is just a few of them. And they could cook on them too. I was torch of little stoves. This is just a few of them, of what they look like. Yeah, they come out with kitchen stoves too, coal and wood. This is just some of the advertisements for them. And they cooked on them, baked in them, everything else. But they made do with what they had. And many a meal is cooked on these old stoves. Seem like they taste better too. The old cast iron stoves. And this is all the way up to the even up to just a few years ago. Some still use them. With an old pot of beans on the stove all the time. I remember growing up like this. Old pot of soup beans. An old pan of cornbread. Nothing better on a cold day outside. And they cooked in stuff like this, in pots like this. They washed in these, water for washing, cooking, old cooking pots of the day. And all of them used these old cast iron skillets. Still use them today. They're great to cook in. And these old stoves, oh man, they put off some good heat. But keeping them fueled up is the problem. Takes a lot of wood to keep these things going, especially in them long winter months, but they're still well worth it. And this is what the old homes look like in the day inside. All in probably one room, two rooms. This is what they slept in, the old beds, what they look like. These are probably nicer than most. But this is what they look like in the old log cabin homes of the day. Big family. And these old homes were drafty too. But this is what the old bedrooms and beds of the days in these old cabins look like. And on them cold nights, they would use what they call a bed warmer. Of course, they might have a fancier name for them, but it's just a little pan that you kept hot coals out of the stove in. They'd break the coals into this little pan, close it up, set it under a bed. If it didn't cause a fire, and it would keep you warm. It would help anyway. And these old houses, like I said, they was drafty. And they used this newspaper for insulation, cover the cracks. No, they didn't do it for decoration. They wasn't rich, didn't have much of nothing, but old newspapers was free, and they covered the cracks and the drafts in the house. Even in the kitchen. I've been in many old homes that I've seen it. You just read history on the wall, these old newspapers. In the old outhouse, no indoor plumbing. This was a challenge on a really cold, snowy days, having to go out there. But at night, it was really bad. But they used something like we called an old slop bucket, or a chambermaid, a fancier name. They kept next to the bed, but they had to go, and they would empty it in the morning. In these old places, back in the early days, all they had was candlelight beside the fire. But as time went on, they come out with a kerosene lantern, which is so common, and even common today. These put off a lot of light. And they got fancier, they come out with fancier indoor kerosene lamps for the home. Some beautiful lamps. Now they don't snow. Some of them on these farms, they still had to do what they had to do. And they'd have to walk across the ridge to check the cattle on the farm. Don't matter how cold it was. The livestock still had to be fed, took care of, until they just couldn't get to them no more. They tried to keep them in a barn if they could. And if the weather were permitting, the old man of the house would try to go out and do a little hunting, put some fresh meat on the table. And in the snow, he could track them. Here's a deer bed where deer had been bedded down in the snow, and they could follow the tracks and kind of track where they're going. And if they're really lucky, they'd come up on a deer and get them some fresh meat to take home. But most of the time, all they could find is a squirrel, if they could find that. Times was hard in the winter months, especially the game. But they wasn't nothing better than some fried squirrel, gravy and biscuits on the stove, some good eating. And these people ate a lot of them too, raised a many a family on them. And sometimes these hunters would get out too far, a big snow would hit, and they couldn't find their way home. Many of them never made it. I've read many stories on this. Only to get lost, give up, freeze to death. So sad. And I've heard stories of my dad, for one, talking about when they's frying bacon on these cold night days, the animals have a hard time, and the old Black Panther, or they called painters, would be up on the house trying to get in. Now, these people, they were isolated anyway in these old mountains. So they done what they had to do to survive. Times were hard in these winter months, that's for sure. They'd look out these old windows, and they'd see the snow just barreling down and no chance to get out. And some of them would get so depressed or lonely if they was by themselves, and some of them just give up. But if you had a family member with you, a wife, some kids, you done it for them to survive and carry on. And they would pass their time keeping wood up to the fire, keeping it stoved up, what they had to do around the house to keep it warm. And the women, their job never ended. no matter how cold it got. If they could, they'd be washing clothes and hanging them outside. What a job. And they'd pass their time by just sewing, making clothes for the family, or quilts, bedding for the home. A lot of them passed their time just reading the Bible, much as they could of it. A lot of them done this just to pass the time and to learn. A lot of them practiced music too in these winter months. Nothing else to do, couldn't get outside. If they played an instrument, they would practice all winter long when they could. And some, they just practiced on growing their family or raising their kids. That's the truth. That's how it was in these mountains. And they would just survive week after week, month after month in this old cold weather in these mountains, and do what they had to do. Especially on these old farms. And winter would try to lessen its grip just a little bit as time went on. But it'd still be so cold. So cold. But they'd prepared for this in the summer months. Before you know it, spring breaks. And oh, they'd just praise the Lord that they made it through another winter. So they'd have to start all over again, preparing for the next winter. So I hope you enjoy these little stories of how our people is all across these rural areas of Appalachia and America. They had hard times, but these people knowed what they was doing, and they survived. So I want to thank you for watching. God bless you. Take care, and I'll see you next time.